Hello, and welcome to Chapter 3, which we'll be covering learner and contextual analysis. Today, we're going to talk first about learner analysis. And learner analysis is simply looking at the learners or the people who are going to be in your training session or the people who you are supposed to be helping. And in the analysis process, you're investigating their characteristics, abilities, and experiences of the learners themselves and as individuals and as of a group. So, what you want to do, you want to make sure that early in the process, you understand who the audience is. So, if they say you're going to be training a group of wiring technicians, like we were looking at in the case, you want to make sure you want to understand who those people are. What's their characteristics, and we'll talk about some specific characteristics in a little bit, but you really want to understand who they are and what their needs are. The learner analysis doesn't impact the goal of the instruction. The goal of the instruction is whatever that client wants it to be, whether it's to teach people to wire boards together better or to teach students how to register online. Whatever the goal of the training is, the goal of the training is. What the learner analysis does is allows the designer to create and design instruction that's best suited for the learners that they're teaching. Just like in a college class, if I came in and started using very little words, taking my time, how are you today? That would annoy you. You are beyond that. You're older than that. You're more experienced. You might want to talk that way when you have maybe little kids. I don't know that much about young children, but maybe in a 2 year old or a 3 year old classroom, that type of approach might work. But it's important to understand your learners so that you can decide how you want to present the information. Some specific things that it will influence the instruction is the entry point. Where do you start? Okay, if we're going to start talking about instructional design, do I jump in and assume you guys know what instructional design means and have an idea of how it works in the workplace? No, we started back by looking at what types of jobs do instructional designers even do so that you can read about the job descriptions and kind of have an understanding about what this field is. And then we're starting to work step by step through the process. Another entry point, if you're going to teach somebody how to register for a class at Chicago State, do you jump right in assuming that they know how to use a computer, that they know how to use the internet, that they know how to log into the system, that they have their CSU username and password? All of those things, whether you answer yes or no, will determine where you start your instruction. Your choice and sequence of objectives. We're going to talk about objectives coming up, but basically, those are those performances. You turn those into objectives of your goal analysis. You look at your performances, and that's what you want your learners to be able to accomplish. Depending on who the learners are and who you're trying to train and what you're trying to achieve, you may want to order those differently or sequence them in such a way that it helps the learners build upon what they already know in order to get to where they're going. And then there's the variety of activities. If you know that your learners are all elderly, 70, 80 years old, you might not want to have training where they're up and moving around and climbing upstairs and doing stuff like that. Maybe you want to make sure the print is larger and not in a 10-point font. So those types of activities and accommodations are what you're going to make decisions on based on understanding thoroughly who your learners are. So let's talk about this a little bit more. Here it is, you're the designer. You need to determine what factors are important because not all of them are going to be readily or easily available. Now, what does that mean? When you're looking at a pool of people that are your learners, say students at Chicago State who need to learn how to register for class, there's all kinds of factors. You could talk about gender, race, ethnicity, age, You can talk about whether they're right-handed or left-handed, or where they went to high school, or whether their parents are alive, or whether they have children. There's all kinds of aspects or characteristics that you can find out about a person, but you have to determine what are the most relevant and salient aspects that you need to watch for that's going to influence the instruction to make it the best possible instruction for those individuals. And there's some general types of characteristics. One of them is just general characteristics, demographics, academic information, personal and social characteristics. You know what these are: age, gender, um, did they ACT scores? Did they graduate from high school? Personal and social characteristics. Are they married? Do they, how big's their family? Different things like that. Um, do they have special talents? What's their motivation level? All that type of stuff is just general characteristics. Then you have specific entry competencies, and this is an important one to think about because if you want your training to be successful, you have to meet the learners where they're at. Okay? And some you might be starting slightly above others and slightly below, the other group of people, but you have to make sure that where you start, they're going to be able to keep up with you. So the best example of this is like a technology or some sort of activity that requires like physical um, coordination or skill level. If they don't know how to do that very first thing that you're teaching them, they're going to turn off. So you have to know what the specific entry competencies are going to be. And your book talks about this. Um, and give some really good ideas here because you have to know where they're at and whether or not they're ready for the training you're going to provide them. Now, another aspect that people talk about a lot are learning styles. Are you a visual learner? Are you auditory or kinesthetic? And trying to provide instruction in all different ways for all different learning styles. People do have different ways that they prefer to learn. However, right now, the research that's coming out says it really doesn't matter a whole bunch. Good instruction is pretty much good instruction, and good instruction uses a variety of activities. You'll have something visual on the screen like a PowerPoint, you'll talk, you'll have different reading assignments, you'll have different activities where, different projects. So, good design actually focuses over several different learning styles, but you're finding people losing favor in the research about the importance of learning styles. So basically, when you're doing a learner analysis, you're looking, the main thing that you need to do first is stop and say, okay, if this is the goal that I'm trying to achieve in training, what do I need to know about the learners to make sure I can present the training or design the training that's going to meet these needs? And then think about what those characteristics are. Is gender important? I don't know. Is race important? I don't know. Is their reading ability important? Might be if you're going to have them write stuff or read a bunch of stuff. Is English their first language? Might be if you're going to be talking or providing reading material to them. So, you really have to determine what's important and then figure out, can you get that information and is it worth the cost of getting that information? And then, as you start looking at this, the different types of analyses, it really boils down to motivation is going to be the single most determinant of success. If the learners are motivated to be in class, if they want to learn, if they feel it's relevant, if they think it's going to help them personally, they're going to be more interested, they'll be more engaged, and they will learn more. And so that's probably one of the first, and we'll talk about this later on, but when you're setting up your instruction, one of the first things you want to do is provide some motivation to get the learners engaged. That's why, if you think back, one of the very first activities we did is looked at job opportunities for instructional designers because I wanted to show you that there's jobs out there, well paying, jobs out there in a variety of fields for people who have these skills. So by showing you that, some of you even said in your discussion board postings that, you're now more interested in this field. You didn't know that it was really out here. So hopefully I've provided some motivation for you to become engaged with the class. And if you want a really good example of the learner analysis, if you have the 5th edition, it's on page 70. If you don't, if you just go to the end of chapter 3, they have an example of a learner analysis that's done under the instructional design decisions and choices. It actually lists, who their audience is, what their characteristics are, their entry characteristics, that type of stuff. And that's an example of how you would write up your learner analysis. So learner analysis isn't anything fancy. It's simply answering the question, what do I need to know about the people that are going to be in the training class, the learners, so that I can design this instruction the best way for them? That's it. That's the simple aspect of the learner analysis. Okay? A couple things you want to think about that of particular groups. One is if you have culturally diverse learners, the book goes into some ways to make the instruction better. You can make accommodations, but you don't ever want to stereotype or create unequal opportunities, especially if it gets to the point where English isn't the first language. You just want to make sure that you provide them either in writing, because some people can read better than they can speak, others are vice versa. If it's truly important that language might be coming in, you might want to consider presenting the materials in 2 different languages, something like that. But culturally diverse, especially when it comes to the English language, is probably one of the most important things. And just making sure that when you're working with examples, you're not being stereotypical or offensive or anything of that nature. And adult learners. Most of you guys are probably going to be working with adults. You're going to be training adults. The group project is for adults. So what you want to do is with adults, and there's a whole section about adult learners that you should look at, a bulleted list about different factors of adults as they sit in a classroom. But some of the things you want to make sure you do when you're designing instruction for adults, you want to be very clear with instructions. There's nothing more frustrating for an adult than not understanding what they're supposed to do because they don't want to be embarrassed. Okay? The benefit of the course, you want to make sure that you're showing that it's relevant to increase their motivation. You want to be very clear with due dates and expectations. Again, they want to perform, they don't want to be embarrassed, they want to know their time's limited, so they want things very clear. You also want to make sure that you encourage participation, sharing experiences, and decision making. Adults have had lives. They have seen things, they've experienced things, they like to share their stories, they like to feel that they have something to contribute. So the more that you can get them working together or talking or sharing, the better you are in terms of getting them engaged. If you can allow them to make some decisions, like one of the things we did is talked about what night we were going to meet in class, that helps them feel ownership. And you also, as the presenter, you want to make sure you're organized and knowledgeable, because that's the very first thing that's going to turn off an adult, is that if they don't think you know what you're talking about, they're not going to give you the time of day. Okay? So those are some things to consider with learning analysis. And then the book turns to contextual analysis. And a context analysis is just a fancy way of saying, where's the course going to be taught? What's the context? Okay? And there's 3 types of context: an orientating, an instructional, and a transfer context. And again, basically, the whole focus is just making sure that you're embedding your instruction in a familiar context that enhances both student achievement and student attitudes. And these 3 areas help that. First is the orientating context, and this context focuses on the learner. You've done your learner analysis, so you know who your learners are. You have some initial ideas of how they think or what they're coming to class with, the characteristics. So what you want to do is figure out how you can orientate the class to meet their needs. A couple things here to ask: what goals do the learners have? Why do they want to take this course? What's the perceived utility for the instruction? Are they going to find it somewhat useful? Or are they here because they were told they had to be here? Um, what's the learner's perception of accountability? Are they going to be required to do this when they get back at the job? Does anybody even know they're here? All those types of questions help you kind of orientate the instruction. And this kind of goes with the motivation that we talked about earlier. If you can help the learners see that the instruction or the training is going to help them achieve their goals and that it's relevant, and you can provide a situation where it's somewhat familiar with them, then it's going to help. Okay, so anything you can do to help orientate your learner to the instruction, whether it be showing them why it's relevant or bringing in early experiences to help them orientate themselves, that will be perfect. The impact on instruction. The impact on the instruction is simply um, really the introduction to the course. When you set it up, you want to make sure that you're showing that it's relevant and that you understand who they are and that you're meeting their needs. The context analysis has nothing to do with the learners. Now you're simply, the instructional context, I apologize, has nothing to do with the learners. What you're now looking at are the physical factors needed for instruction, the scheduling, the electrical outlets, the whiteboards. Is this going to be a face-to-face training? Are we going to have workbooks? Is this going to be online? Do we have to find out how to get the instructions on a web page? This instructional context will determine the impact on the instruction. It's going to determine what you actually do, how you have to get ready, what you have to do to prepare. And a lot of times this comes from talking to your client. What do they see? Do they see this as a face-to-face class where you're going to have to figure out how to schedule rooms and get workbooks and materials? Or do they see this as something completely online? So there's not a lot of physical things you have to worry about, but just something like that. Scheduling's always an issue. Can people do it on their own time? Do they have to have it done by a certain date? It's really just good to understand what the instructional context is or expectations from your client. And finally, the transfer context. This is probably one of the most important things because you want your learners to be able to take what they've used or learned in your class and transfer it back to their workplace. So there's a couple areas to look at is equipment. If you go to a class on Excel or maybe the new software that's out for instructional designers, Storyline. It's a brand new product that's out there. If you go to a class and that you learn how to use this software while you're sitting in the class, but when you get back to your office or at home, you don't have the software or the equipment, you're going to lose what you've learned very, very quickly. So if you want to make sure that the person can transfer their skills, you first need to make sure that they have the equipment or the software or the tools available to them so that they can go back and actually use and practice what they learned. Second, opportunities. They have to have the opportunity to actually do this. Maybe if they've gone to a job on management or leadership, you want to make sure that there's some opportunity. Maybe they're going to chair a committee or something like that where they can actually use those. In terms of like registering for on courses on CSU Cougar Connect page for students, you want to make sure you're doing the training when it's time to register for classes. You don't want to have a let's learn how to register for classes in the middle of the semester, a month or two before the class schedule even comes out, because there's no opportunity to practice then. Also, support is another thing. When they get back Are their friends, are their supervisors, are their managers, are they going to find the support they need? If not, how are you going to help provide them with support? Do you create a discussion group of the people that were in the class so they can support each other? Different things like that. So, how you're going to want or help the learners transfer from the classroom to their work environment is something to think about. And the impact on instruction there is that at the end of the class, that's what you want to be thinking about. How can you launch them out? How can you help them transition to their workplace? And you might even want to come up with some ideas or a checklist or something that you want to give them. So, those are the three different contextual analysis. The first one focuses on the learners themselves and why they're there. The second one focuses on the instructional context and what you actually need to provide the instruction. And the last one focuses on the transfer. How do you get the learners out and using the skills and knowledge that they learned? When you're looking at conducting a context analysis, don't make it real difficult. Again, this is a cost. You look at the cost versus the benefits of the data. If it's going to take you forever to figure out what motivates a group of people, you might not be able to survey everybody. Pick a random sample. Maybe if it's a smaller group like on Chicago State campus, you talk to 2 or 3 people. If it's going to be a nationwide rollout like something in McDonald's or Walgreens where you're going to train, lots of people, maybe you spend more time doing some analysis up front, better surveys or interviews. But think about the cost versus benefit, especially in terms of time, not just money. Um, how much time do you have? A lot of time when you have a consulting job or you're working in an organization or like this class, like in this class, you got 3 months. You can't spend a whole month on the learner analysis and expect to get done with the project. It's got to be kind of quick. So, and realize that the more you learn, there really should be some constraints and limitation on the design and the delivery of the instruction. If your client says he wants it all web based, but you find out that the people that you're going to provide it to aren't the ones that have internet in their homes or something, then that might be hard to do. Or maybe they want it web based, but they're assembly line people and they don't have computers. So you got to think about that. And so that would provide some constraints and limitations. But really, all